At the intersection of true crime and real estate, you'll find Crime Estate. I'm Heather.
And my name is Elena. As real estate agents and true crime junkies, we view crimes through a different lens.
So walk through the door of some of the most notorious true crimes with us and discover how sometimes the scene of the crime has its own story to tell. Well, hey y'all, welcome back to Crime Estate. Today we are taking you to 1960s Houston, where we're discussing the life, death, and of course, incredible real estate of Joan and John Hill, a couple whose story is so notorious that countless books and movies have been written about them. I'm Heather. I'm joined as always by my dear friend and fellow realtor, Elena, and our producer and commentator, Melanie, who I have to say, y'all, knocked the research on this story out of the park. Hey, ladies.
Hey.
Thank you.
You sound so professional.
Oh, do I?
You're really good at the intros.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, her dad did just text her and say that she sounds like she's on NPR.
Oh.
Yeah, Dad has a road trip coming up, and so he's been downloading the podcast, and now I'm trying to remember, like, what have we said about my dad? Do I need to prep him for anything?
Dad.
Of course we do. Yeah.
I don't think we would have ever said anything bad. Maybe a little silly.
But yeah, you and I have been crazy busy. Spring market's here. So thanks, Melanie, for jumping in and helping us out this week.
Yeah. This is one of those interesting, I think it's one of the more interesting stories to date because it really encapsulates a lot of what we talk about on this show. And I'm excited to see how you've put your spin on it.
All right. Well, we have got not one, but two crimes on our hands today. And this story is the perfect embodiment of Texas. Picture oil money, horses, high society, stunning people, and plenty of plastic surgery.
Okay.
And as they say, everything's bigger in Texas, including this gripping tale of two possible murders. So let me introduce you to the key players in today's episode. First, let's start with Joan Robinson Hill. Now, she was born February 6, 1931 in Houston and was adopted as an infant by David Ashton Ash Robinson, who was a wealthy oil tycoon, and his wife, Rhea. And Joan was their only child, and from the moment she came into the Robinson family, she was treated like royalty. Ash, in particular, doted on her, and he was known to fund whatever Joan wanted. One article I read said that Ash and his wife, Rhea, looked like something out of a Grant Wood painting, and I was not cultured enough to know what that meant, so I looked it up. And it's he's the guy that painted American Gothic, so the very stoic farmers with the pitchfork. And he's right. Like they were salt of the earth, very simple people who did well for themselves and were self-made millionaires. And then they adopt this like golden child.
I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Joan as a child was a natural-born equestrian. By the age of 3, Elena, she had already started riding horses, and by 5, she had won her first ribbon at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo on a horse named Dottie.
I grew up going to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo because I am from the Houston area, and it's the analogy for us in Dallas would be like the state fair. Like, we're a month in in Dallas, everything kind of revolves around the state fair. Either you're trying to avoid it or you're going all the time, like some people in this room. But I mean, it's just kind of like a fun event. And in Houston, it's the rodeo. And it's not just like the rodeo, like there's stuff that goes around the rodeo as well. And so like our kids get off a day for State Fair Day. In Houston, you get a day off for a rodeo day.
I love that. Well, she went on to win hundreds of trophies throughout her childhood, competing on American saddlebred horses. Her two most prized horses were Beloved Belinda and Precious Possession. Like that alliteration. Joan was known for her beauty and grace, and one newspaper writer even said, "When Joan Robinson rides Beloved Belinda, it's like watching a poem, a waltz, the sculpture of Rodin, and the painting of Cezanne all in one."
That's beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Now, Joan was a stunning woman. People often compared her to the actress Sybil Shepherd. And with a life filled with privilege, she attended Stevens College in Missouri. But despite her upbringing, Joan's personal life was full of drama. She married twice before the age of 20. first to Spike Benton, a Navy pilot, and then to New Orleans lawyer Cecil Burgess. But both marriages were brief, lasting less than 6 months. Her father, Ash, was none too thrilled about her choice in husbands, which only added to some tension in the family. Dad goes on to lease a suite of rooms at a nearby hotel and installs her mom in the hotel while she finishes school.
Wow.
Now, in college, a talent scout from Metro Golden Meyer, I guess it was Meyer, in college, MGM, thank you, offered Joan a screen test, but her father didn't want her to go to Hollywood. He believed it was a world full of predators and refused to let his daughter take the opportunity. Like we mentioned before, Joan's real passion, though, was horseback riding, and by the 1950s, she was competing professionally. She became a well-known figure in the equestrian world, and her horses were celebrated for their skill and beauty. Now let's turn to Dr. John Hill, who is going to be Joan's future husband. John was a Texas boy through and through, raised in a devout Church of Christ family. He attended medical school and went on to become a plastic surgeon at Houston's Herman Hospital. But what most people didn't know about John Hill was his first love, music. He was an incredibly gifted musician who devoted 20 hours a week to playing the piano and other instruments, including the trombone, tuba, flute, and recorder. He even played in an orchestra called the Heartbeats, which was made up entirely of doctors.
That's precious.
Isn't that cute?
Yeah, I read these old memories that these people in a forum were talking about him. And it was surprising how many people, like 20, 30 years later, remembered, oh, yeah, I remembered seeing them, or they played at my school, or they played at like just different events around town. Yeah, it was just kind of very memorable.
Oh,
Yeah.
Was the recorder like a legitimate instrument? Because it's like the trombone, the flute, the tuba.
I mean, I think that's only a legitimate instrument in like third grade when you're
Yeah,
learning to
I
play
know,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like my kids missed really good prime recorder years. I think they dabbled in it at their school, but like recorder was big in my elementary school.
Yes. You know, and it's interesting because he grew up Church of Christ, and typically in the Church of Christ, they only sing a cappella. They don't believe in using instruments. So I found that like his love of instruments, even from an early age, interesting, given his history and traditions. So when he decided to specialize in plastic surgery, it was really a pretty strategic move on his part. At the time, there were only 10 plastic surgeons in Houston. And it was an up-and-coming field. How many do you think there are now?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, let's be honest now.
Like throw
Texas,
a rock and hit one? Yeah.
Yeah. And he worked at Herman Hospital, which, I mean, that's like creme de la creme. That's where people, you know, the Houston Medical District really is phenomenal. And that's, you know, where people from all across the country will come to have surgery. And it's really well known.
Well, John was a popular member of the residency program there. But ladies, he almost had his medical career cut short after perforating a patient's bowel during a routine operation, then stitching the man up without repairing the damage.
Oh my gosh.
The patient later died, and Hill received a severe reprimand after an autopsy uncovered his mistake.
That's intense.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like he was always the best doctor.
Mm-hmm. So Joan and John met at a party in the late 1950s, and after a whirlwind romance, they married on September 28th, 1957. Joan continued with her equestrian career, that's a mouthful, and John focused on building his career as a plastic surgeon. But despite their seemingly perfect life, cracks began to form in their marriage. On June 14th, 1960, the Hills had a son who they named Robert Ashton Hill, but who was quickly nicknamed Boot by his grandfather.
They're really
It's so
good
cute.
with the names.
Mm-hmm.
They do have some cute nicknames.
Mm-hmm. Upon completing his residency, Hill was offered a partnership by Nathan Ross, a New York City trained surgeon who had established himself in Houston, and he joined that practice in 1963. Hill's partnership with Roth got off to a difficult start after he failed to warn his first patient that a drill bit had broken off during a jaw repair operation, leaving it embedded in the patient's face.
Oh gosh.
Mm-hmm. When challenged by Roth, Hill was apologetic about his error, saying he had been hesitant to mention this mistake on his very first case. And I guess fortunately, I mean, horrible timing, but fortunate in this situation, his brother had actually just passed away. And so Roth gave him the benefit of the doubt because he thought, maybe he was just grieving and distracted. And so the Hills go on to become a regular part of the Houston social scene. But at this point, they're really largely leading separate lives. Joan's focused on her equestrian career. John's devoted to performing and listening to music in his spare time. And when Joan officially retired beloved Belinda, the event made national headlines. Sports Illustrated reported that a band played Old Lang Syne. Is that the one that you sing at
New Year's?
on New Year's? Mm-hmm. While Joan led Belinda covered in a blanket of roses around the show ring at the Pin Oak Horse Show for the last time in 1959. A groom who was present commented to his wife that Abe Lincoln himself didn't have a funeral as good as this one. And get this, y'all, for the first 6 years of their marriage, Joan and John lived with her parents in their property, moving from there only after a fellow surgeon suggested the idea to John that he might want to get his own house. Like it had just never occurred to him.
Well, I guess it worked. If it worked out for them,
I guess. I mean, do you think you could have lived with your parents for the first 6 years after you got married?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think I could have.
No. I love my parents, but no, it would not be good for anybody in the family.
So the Hills go on to buy a house at 1561 Kirby Drive, a Southern colonial style house located in the wealthy neighborhood of River Oaks, a few blocks from the Robinsons' home. Now, we covered River Oaks before on this podcast in episode 13 when we discussed the death of Doris Angleton, but that's been a little while, so let me remind you about the neighborhood. The Compass website describes River Oaks as Houston's most regal neighborhood. River Oaks has long been synonymous with luxury, situated within the 610 loop between downtown and uptown. It was the city's first master-planned community and has long attracted Houston's affluent and socially prominent residents. You can expect majestic oak trees and picturesque thoroughfares. River Oaks is well-named and a tree-filled neighborhood loaded with street after street of impeccably maintained yards, elegant shopping centers, and this lush enclave is one of the wealthiest communities in Texas. The real estate market in River Oaks includes opulent estates with extraordinary gardens, built in a smattering of architectural styles from English Tudor to Spanish colonial revival. The neighborhood's original homes from the 20s and 30s are now mixed with modern builds that are just as grand in both size and sophistication. And indeed, the property John and Joan Hill purchased at 1561 Kirby Road is opulent and stunning. The 6,531 square feet property sits on a half acre and includes 4 bedrooms and 3 baths. Originally built in 1935, this home is of the Palladian architectural design. I didn't know exactly what that was, so I looked it up. The best thing I can say is picture the White House. So it sort of has that Greek style with columns. It wants to be very orderly and balanced, symmetrical. It uses a lot of arched windows. So if you're watching us on YouTube and looking at pictures of this house, go to YouTube and watch us now. We do that these days.
Yes.
Can we comment on that?
Yeah. And I'm showing a picture of the house and, describe me at sort of White House. Yeah, it definitely reflects it.
And listeners, we have a treat for you because the house featured in today's story is currently for sale. The listing description reads, surrounded by an iron fence and banks of colorful azaleas, a lush lawn, 1561 Kirby Drive awaits. This iconic colonial is positioned at Kirby and Brentwood to maximize privacy among towering oaks. Black and white marble foyer is adorned by a gorgeous cast plaster ceiling. An intimate yet spacious dining room with stone fireplaces made for memories. The living room boasts a fireplace and classic ceiling detail. Nearby study is anchored by leaded glass window framed by Peggy Martin roses. A cook's kitchen with features too numerous to mention is open to family and breakfast rooms. Climatized wine storage enhances this home's heart. 2 powder rooms and an apartment behind the garage complete the first floor. Pool, entertaining space, and flowing fountain fulfill the grounds. The second floor includes a primary suite and 2 bedrooms with 4 suite and exercise room on the 3rd floor. The defining feature is an elegant music ballroom with unmatched ceiling mural, marble fireplace, and dramatic access to the pool. This property is currently listed by Kristen Tillman with Greenwood King Properties for $5.2 million.
That's a great description.
She did a really good
That's
job.
a really, really good
I
description.
mean, for $5.2 million, you hope you're getting a good write-up. But yeah, she did a good job.
I would describe the interior of this home now as Mackenzie Childs meets like Greek architecture revival, like Baroque. There's a lot of gold, like the cast stone, and then a lot of Mackenzie Childs, like black and white checked patterns.
It is, definitely a more traditional style decorated inside the house right now. And spoiler alert, the people that live there, I think, are in their maybe late 70s, early 80s. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. But it's definitely very nice.
Beautiful and tasteful.
Yeah. I mean, even if you weren't a traditionalist, you could upgrade it pretty easily.
Yeah. So 2 years after moving into the home on Kirby Drive, the partnership between John Hill and Nathan Roth was dissolved. Roth said he grew tired of John's repeated request for Roth to cover for him so that he could give musical recitals. So like you said, Melanie, he was playing all over town. Hill then established his own practice in the same building as his former business partner. Now, following the success of his own practice, John announced to Joan that he wished to convert a former servant's room into a music room at their house. Hill asked his father-in-law, Ash Robinson, to lend him $10,000 for the project, but Robinson refused as he believed it to be frivolous, and Hill had already had a loan from him to buy the house. So then Hill arranged for a bank loan, which enabled him to pay off the money that Ash had lent him, and to start this music room.
Well, at least this is one story where the dad didn't outright buy the house.
No, you're right. We run into so many of those.
A lot.
Like as a wedding present, usually.
Yeah, and we usually all get really jealous.
But I like Ash. He's real practical. He's like, you want money for a house? Okay, great. You want money for a music room? No.
Yeah. I could see my dad doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pay back the loan before you're, adding on.
I bet that loan did have some like really favorable payback terms though.
Sure.
Yeah. It may have just been in the family type of money, but yeah.
So anyway, once John figured out how to pay for the music room he wanted, he then commissioned a sound engineer to create it, telling him, quote, I want the finest music room since Renaissance Italy.
For his recorder playing.
It's estimated the $10,000 cost was quickly exceeded, and by October 1968, Hill had spent $75,000 on the venture. One of his ambitions was to own a handmade, I'm going to say Bosendorfer piano. That could be pronounced differently.
We're going to go with it.
It's the world's most expensive piano. So, of course, he had to have it.
Wow.
And on hearing that a local firm had obtained the Austrian company's Houston franchise, he ordered an Imperial Grand for $15,000. That Bosendorfer was delivered in March of 1969 and installed beside a Yamaha Grand belonging to Joan. Now, at this point, having cost in excess of $100,000, in March of 1969, John Hill's music room was almost complete. One article we read said it became a ballroom-sized room with a double-height ceiling full of Renaissance-type frescoes with baccarat crystal chandeliers. The carved marble fireplace was taken from an old Louisiana plantation home. Hill chose parquet flooring and a gold and white color scheme for the entire room. The pianos were placed at one end with French provincial sofas cushioned by an oriental carpet at the other end. Gold and white silk wall panels concealed shelves for records, music-related books, and Hill's musical instruments. Hill had 108 speakers installed in the room, connected with 4 miles of wiring. He spent more than $20,000 on the room's sound system. He also added a hidden movie screen on which to project his collection of comedy films, which was also hidden behind one of the silk wall panels. The room became a bone of contention. Joan was angry about the amount of money her husband had poured into realizing this dream.
And for those of you on YouTube or not on YouTube, I am displaying pictures of this room. And I mean, if you told me it was in Vienna, I would not be surprised at all that it was in like a palace. I mean,
It's exactly what it looks like.
And are these pictures recent pictures?
These are the pictures from the listing.
Yeah.
That's current. Yeah.
Yeah. So another spoiler alert. The current homeowners, remember this story is in the late 60s, have kept this room as almost in the same condition. But yeah, it is crazy nice.
All right, so let's back up to some of the things that are going on behind the scenes while this music room is being built. By 1968, John was having an affair with Anne Kurth. She was a 3-time divorcee, mom of 3 sons who he met when their kids were at summer camp together.
What a jerk.
Now, despite the fact that the music room of his dreams is almost complete, John actually moves out and files for divorce in the fall of 1968. Can you imagine your husband's spent $100,000 making this dream room? And he's like, never mind, I'm out of here.
I would be pissed.
He must have thought he was going to get the house in the divorce.
Yeah, no, you're never going to be able to sell this room and get your money out of it. I mean, it is too specific.
So during their 1968 separation, Joan confides in one of her friends, Patty, that the music room had really been central to their troubles. She said, he doesn't care about me or our son or anybody else, only that goddamn music room. I wish he had never started building it.
Sad.
I know. And Joan, despite having a detective investigate John and learning of his infidelity, still wanted to make it work. So she calls her dad, and Dad calls up John and says, hey, I want you to come over here to the house one night. We need to talk. And so Hill does go. He goes and meets Ash at their house. And her dad had drafted a letter of apology for him to sign.
What?
And then some sort of reconciliation offer. I'm not sure exactly what the details of that were, but Dad had orchestrated, daughter wants her husband back. Let me see what I can do. And he also reminded him that he did owe him some money. And so, if he didn't get back with his daughter, he might really want that money repaid sooner rather than later.
Good for him.
Yeah. So John did reconcile with Joan, but he still continued to see Anne, unbeknownst to everybody else. I know. But that kind of secret is hard to keep, Elena, and 3 months later, in March of 1969, Joan discovered that John was, in fact, still having an affair with Anne. The two fought when this came to light, obviously, but ever the proper socialite couple, the two put on a good front when Joan's friends Diane and Eunice came to visit from Dallas and stayed at the house on Kirby Drive. In what would later be considered a very odd ritual, every evening of their visit after dinner, John would hand-select a pastry for his wife and their guests to have for dessert. He would not allow them to change pastries, and he handed them out one at a time.
Weird.
I love your facial expression.
I'm picking my pastry.
Right?
Yes, I'm getting what I want.
On Saturday, March 15th, Joan woke up very ill. She told Diane and Eunice that John had given her a pill the night before that knocked her out, and that she was having trouble keeping any food or liquids down. John gave Joan some OJ, and her friends left Joan to rest and recover. And by the time they left to return to Dallas on Monday, Joan's condition had not improved, and they were concerned that, at this point, that they were just worried she was going to be dehydrated because she'd been still ill. But she assured them she was fine, and so they left to travel back to Dallas. Now, on Tuesday, the family maid arrived and found Joan so sick that she was laying in bed on soiled sheets, as she was too weak at this point to get up and walk to the bathroom. The maid attempted to reach John, and when she was unable to do so, she reached out to Joan's parents. An article reads, the severity of Joan's illness was known only to those in the Hill household until the morning of March 18th, 1969, when her mother entered her daughter's sick room. She found Joan lying in her own body waste and vomit as John stood at the foot of his wife's bed. When the mom found that her daughter had a fever, John told his mother-in-law that he thought Joan should be taken to a hospital. However, he did not summon an ambulance for his wife, who was now semi-conscious, but insisted on driving her himself. The hospital he chose was not one of Houston's noted medical centers, but a new hospital in Houston's suburbs, Sharptown General Hospital, which was a 45-minute drive from the Hill home. The hospital had no emergency room or intensive care unit at the time of Joan's admission.
So he's bypassing, the hospital he works at, which it is and was a renowned hospital. I mean, he had to bypass quite a few hospitals to go all the way to it's sort of South Houston to, I guess it was a brand new hospital, but it's not where you would think.
Right.
You would usually think you were taking it to somewhere the doctors, right?
Right, yeah.
So within hours of being at Sharpstown General, Joan's kidneys began to fail. And since they had no dialysis machine, the medical team debated about transferring her back to Houston Methodist, where, they would have the equipment to do dialysis. But Dr. Hicks believed that she was too ill to be transferred. The option for treating her at the hospital was to begin a peritoneal dialysis. I'm sure I just butchered that terminology. So Dr. Hicks wanted the consent of John Hill before beginning this procedure and phoned him at the Kirby Drive home at 9:15 p.m. Hill left the house after taking the phone call, but did not arrive at Sharpstown General to give his consent until 11. His wife was conscious and begged him to stay with her, saying that she was frightened. Side note, you take your spouse to the hospital, you do not go home.
Right. I was thinking the same thing.
And just go to bed.
Right.
You stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Glad we're on the same page about this. At 2:30 a.m. on March 19th, the attending nurse noticed that Joan's vital signs indicated sudden heart failure. She ran to the room's doorway and shouted to the nurse's station to have the resident on duty come immediately with cardiac failure equipment. As she did this, Joan slightly raised her head, gasping her husband's name. As she tried to breathe, a flood of blood rushed from her mouth, and she died shortly thereafter.
I'm going to cry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry.
Well, she just seems so sweet.
She did. She seems lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as you might imagine, when an otherwise healthy 38-year-old woman dies, people want to know why. And by Texas law, Joan should have been autopsied because she died within 24 hours of admission into a hospital. But within 4 hours of her death, John had had her body picked up by the funeral home, where she was quickly embalmed. The pathologist arrived to do the autopsy after the embalming process had been completed, which made the autopsy process much more difficult. And the only thing he could really find unusual was a slight discoloration of her pancreas, and so he determined that she had died of acute pancreatitis. But Ash Robinson couldn't or wouldn't believe that this was the cause of his daughter's death, and on the day of Joan's funeral, he went to the Houston District Attorney's office and stated that he thought John had killed Joan somehow. As a result of this visit, the DA asked the medical examiner to perform more tests on Joan's body, and he determined her death to be caused by viral hepatitis, but did not think that foul play was involved. Ash, though, her dad, still refuses to believe that no crime has been committed, and so he hires lawyer Frank Briscoe, who's a former Harris County District Attorney. And as part of his investigation, Briscoe spoke to the pathologist. He asked him whether it would have been possible to inject someone with hepatitis. The pathologist felt that this was an unlikely scenario, but offered the lawyer an alternative opinion on how Joan may have contracted the virus. He said that he had been told in the days prior to her death that she had eaten both shellfish and snails, and he felt that that may have caused her to contract hepatitis. Dad then petitioned his son-in-law to give permission for Joan's body to be exhumed for another autopsy, but John refused. Side note, I did not know you could get hepatitis from shellfish and snails. Is that true?
I don't know.
Maybe in the 60s? I'm going to have to Google that later. Okay. So according to Wikipedia, Ash Robinson sought to hire the, quote, best pathologist in the United States to conduct another autopsy on his daughter. Robinson's search led him to Dr. Milton Halpern, who was the chief medical examiner for New York City at the time. Halpern agreed to come to Houston to examine Robinson Hill's body 5 months after her death. An autopsy was also requested by Harris County grand jury investigating the death of Robinson Hill. That autopsy was performed by a team of 10 doctors, led by Dr. Robert Buckland, who was then the medical examiner for Galveston County, and including Dr. Halpern, who was deputized as an acting Harris County medical examiner.
So how did they get permission to exhume the body?
I think maybe as a result of the grand jury investigation, it was like an order from the judge at this point.
So at this point in time, John didn't have an option.
Okay,
Right.
Gotcha.
So as soon as the casket was opened, Halpern found pieces of dried mud in it, indicating that the casket had been opened after Joan was originally buried. When questioned, the funeral home informed the medical team that John had obtained an order to disinter his wife 3 days after her funeral. John claimed that he wanted to retrieve a piece of jewelry that had been buried with her. While making the wake and funeral arrangements, John, however, had insisted that his wife be buried with no jewelry at all, not even her wedding ring. Helper found nothing amiss related to the disinterment, but noted that Joan's stomach and its contents were never removed and examined at the original autopsy. The pathologist's disapproval became disbelief when he discovered that Joan's brain and heart were missing.
Weird.
Crazy.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, so then Dr. Morse makes an embarrassing admission to not returning the organs prior to burial. He said that he did, however, know the whereabouts of Joan's brain. It was, Elena, in the trunk of his car.
What?
The Texas pathologist retrieved the brain for Dr. Halpern's examination.
So remind me, this was the first doctor who did the autopsy?
I think that's right.
Yeah. A lot of doctors involved in here.
So they start examining her brain. Dr. Halpern thinks that maybe there were traces of meningitis, but declined to state whether he thought this was the cause of her death. He examined Joan's body for 7.5 hours, and then he went back to New York with tissue samples, saying he would issue a report on his findings at a later date.
So was he not reprimanded or anything for just...
I didn't go down the rabbit hole of what happened to Dr.
Just so
Morse.
crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that there might be something amiss by the organs that you're seeing months later that have been in a Texas heated trunk of a car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have so many questions about like how that was stored and all sorts of other things. And why?
Will
Yes.
we get to that?
No.
Oh, okay.
You'll just have to have a question.
Okay.
Okay, so following all of this autopsy, a fresh report is issued, and he says, "It's now my opinion that Joan Robinson Hill came to her death as a result of a fulminating infectious process, the specific nature of which is no longer determinable." He went on to recommend that the matter be investigated by a grand jury. He did not issue his report until April 1970, more than a year after her death. And his report noted that John Hill's treatment of his wife at home and the delay in seeking specialized medical attention at a hospital were factors in Joan's death. Now, while all of this investigating is going on, John and Anne, they go and get married.
Oh my gosh.
But that doesn't last very long, and they divorce within a year.
Good.
In February of 1970, the case was heard by a third grand jury, and this this panel heard testimony from Anne, who told them that John had confessed to killing Joan to her and had also tried to kill her on 3 occasions. When Dr. Halpern presented his findings to the grand jury in April of 1970, the district attorney believed that John had murdered his wife, but there was not enough evidence to indict him. He suggested, though, that they could try him for failing to provide an adequate level of care, which had resulted in her death. The jury voted 10-2 to indict Hill for murder by omission, deciding that he had willfully, intentionally, and culpably contributed to his wife's death because he had not given her sufficient medical help. The state of Texas had not previously indicted anyone on a charge of murder by omission.
That's really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, is that because of his medical training? Were they able to make something like that stick? Because like, how would I know as not a medical professional?
Yeah, I mean, it might have been a bit of the fact that he was a doctor. Might also have been the fact that he was letting his wife sit in her own waste and for like a couple of days in her bed that the maid saw, that her parents saw. He was being a real bad doctor / husband. Mm. But yeah, I mean, I love how even on some of our stories, there's also always some interesting legalese. Mm-hmm. If you're a new listener to the podcast, we always find some opportunity to talk about the law or changes to the law. Murder by omission was a new one for me.
Yeah, same. So in his first trial, Anne testified that John said he had killed Joan by lacing those pastries that we talked about earlier with infectious bacteria, which I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess, yes, you get foodborne illness from a bacteria in a... It seems
kind of random, but it also seems very specific. Like how would how would she know? And by the way, she does seem to be a drama queen. Definitely she later writes a book, etc. But the pastry story seems like a very specific story that his mistress would not necessarily know about.
Yeah, that's fair. Because she wasn't present for the handing out of the pastries.
Right. I mean, it just seems like a random kind of storyline.
So that first trial ended up in a mistrial. And fun fact, John Hill had the same attorney as T. Colin Davis, who's another story we have covered here on the podcast.
Yes, that was
We love finding those
another
parallels.
very rich guy in Fort Worth who, well, go check out that story. That was a pretty cool one. And remember, his attorney was Racehorse Haynes. Remember? A racehorse who was very dramatic and was a very successful defense attorney. So I love to see our stories coincidentally blending together. But yeah, the reason why it ended in mistrial was because, remember, they were charging him with murder by omission, but then she is stating in that he injected and laced these pastries. Gotcha. So at that point in time, they still think he did it, but now they can't charge him with murder by omission. They need to charge him with murder. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I hadn't picked up on that nuance. Appreciate it. Okay, now, Elena, if this story isn't crazy enough. On September 24th, 1972, a few weeks before the second trial is supposed to start, Hill is shot dead by a masked gunman during a robbery at the mansion that Hill and his third wife, Connie, had returned to after attending a medical conference.
What the heck?
I mean, and this is all within, this is 72. The murder was in, or 69?
69, yeah.
Yeah, it was, so there's a lot going on in a couple of years.
And I'm going to turn this over to Melanie at this point because this got a little convoluted for me.
Well, hold on. Is this on Kirby Drive?
Yes.
Okay.
At the same house.
Okay.
At the same house. So what happened was he and his wife, new wife Connie, who apparently was lovely and absolutely the opposite of his first two wives, but more mousy, shared his love of music, had just been at a Las Vegas medical conference, and somebody had broken into the house, and I think that this person's name was Bobby Vanderveer, and had tied up his young son, who I guess was there. And so they go into the house, and in River Oaks, and then he and Bobby's mother had, so what it was that they had been waiting for them to return from the trip from the West Coast. Bobby knocked on the door, the son answered it, let him in, where he tied them up. And then the Hills drove up from the airport, and the wife goes up to the door first, and Vanderveer tries to pull her into the house, but then John Hill comes up behind her, and she starts to run off to the neighbors, and Bobby Vanderveer and Dr. John Hill get into a scuffle, and Vanderveer ultimately shoots him and quote unquote wins. So there was a whole discussion at this point in time of whether or not this was a contract killing. And who do you think might be the person who's being accused of contracting the killing?
Joan's dad.
100%.
Ash. Ultimately, they were able to get the guy who had shot him, and turns out, then he dies in like a shootout while he's being captured, as occurs. Then they link him to like the getaway drivers, and it's like two women. One of the women who was a Galveston Madame brothel owner, whose husband was also a Houston bookie, which goes back to one of our other stories, which was the Doris Angleton story, that the murder that occurred less than a mile away, 20 or 15 years later, and there was a bookie involved in that story as well. So long way of saying that in the end, they try and they can't charge Ash Robinson because there was no direct evidence tying him other than lots of circumstantial evidence and lots of gossip around town that he was, in fact, the one who had done this contract killing. And ultimately, Connie, this brand new third wife, adopted John's son, Boot, and raised him in that same house, which is crazy. And ultimately, he then moved on and is now a prosecuting attorney in Maryland, but does not ever talk about the scenario. One of the weirdest, saddest things that I read later on was that Connie and Boot sued Ash in a civil case, basically trying to get money from him, saying that his dad would never killed his mom and that his dad only died because of Ash. And that lawsuit was thrown out. But it just kind of reminded me about the Doris Angleton case, where also the children, remember there was those twin girls, did not believe that their dad had been the murderer and sided with him. And it just seemed a lot of like ties to this story.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about what happened to the house.
All right. So, like we mentioned, it is currently for sale. And Mel, were you able to determine if these are the same owners that purchased it, like when Connie sold it, or was there?
No, there's been multiple families
Okay.
that have purchased it, and it's interesting. People talk about it. There's a lot, the Houston social life scene is interesting and high society, and there was a lot of discussion about it. But some of the previous people that owned it, they would throw charity events at the house, for money or for different causes. Like one famous one that was written up in the Houston newspapers was a Halloween party where everyone was supposed to dress up, and they had at least 3 Joan Hills dress up that we're taking pictures of at this high society event. Yeah, that's a little creepy on that one. I think that, but then I believe in around 2013, a family, they were actually, Robin was the daughter of the late Houston Rockets owners. They bought the house, and they bought the house specifically because of the story. They had lived in the neighborhood. They walked around the neighborhood all the time, and they wanted to buy that house. And they kept and have kept that music room as a shrine to the Hills. Every room in the house has some sort of memorabilia to the history. This isn't a scenario in a lot of our homes where people are trying to pretend or forget what has happened at this home. No. They have embraced it, and it's front and center, and everyone in the community knows about the storyline about what has happened there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I did want to say one interesting thing that I read about, that there's been a lot of medical articles written about the story, of course, as one would not expect, because now, some of the theories is that what Joan died of was actually toxic shock syndrome, because all of her symptoms are apparently classic cases of toxic shock, at which it was not something that was diagnosed in the late 60s. It wasn't ever come out. I never really kind of understood toxic shock, except, when you started using tampons, you freaked out about right. that. And so there's a lot of theories that maybe it really was toxic shock, but then there was still the murder by omission. Anyway, it's just very interesting that these stories are still spoken about to this day.
So what do you think, Elena? Would you live there or would you list it?
I would list it. I would not live there. I don't think I would live in the neighborhood if the Doris Angleton was the same neighborhood, just like bad vibes.
It's a really nice neighborhood.
It's like the Highland Park of Houston.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, you're a no. What about you, Mel?
I always, when it's a historical kind of crime, because I feel like there's been enough years that some of the bad juju is kind of have rolled off right now, and there has been multiple families that have lived there since then. I did see that it's on the some murder or Houston ghost tours. Not that they go inside the house, but, they'd go and drive around. And, I wouldn't like that. People kind of coming outside of my house and kind of pointing. So that's the only thing that might give me pause. But as you mentioned, it is on the market today. And the family that owns it loves it. But because they are getting older in age, they kind of want to have a home that has a bedroom on the first floor.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with Melanie. I don't think I would want people, I wouldn't want my house on a tour that people are walking by.
Yeah.
But I don't think I wouldn't live there as a result of the crimes. And I would definitely list it. It's a beautiful, beautiful home. So, yeah.
Very good.
Well, yeah, thanks, guys. Melanie, seriously, we really appreciate you doing the outline this week. That was so helpful. And we hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. If you love the show, did you know you can now support us by buying us a cup of coffee?
Yeah, please buy us on our website. It's Buy Me a Coffee.
Yeah, you can scan the QR code. You can click the link. There are all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, it might be a glass of wine or
probably
a
is.
screwdriver, depending upon the time of day that we're taping this.
Yeah. And do you have it on YouTube, the QR code?
Yes, I do.
Yay.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, yeah, subscribe, buy us a cup of coffee, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for listening and being a part of our Crime Estate family.
If you're curious about today's featured crime estate, you can find additional photos and details from today's episode online at crimeestate.com or on Facebook and Instagram by following at Crime Estate Podcast.
Have a crime estate we should cover? Let us know. Shoot us an email at crimeestatepodcast@gmail.com. Until next week.